In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations span and wars are fought with precision-engineered perfection, there exists a small blue planet whose inhabitants still fight with what the Galactic Council considers primitive brutality. They call it Earth, and its people, humans, have just applied for membership in the most exclusive club in the universe. The Council chambers echo with laughter as they review Earth's military records. Crude kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, and worst of all, the chaotic, unpredictable nature of human combat. No algorithms, no predictable patterns, just raw aggression and something the Council has forgotten exists, the will to survive at any cost. But as the laughter dies down and the first human delegation prepares to face judgment, ancient files buried deep in the Council's archives begin to surface. Files that speak of a species that once terrorized the galaxy. Files that mention a world called Earth. Files that the Council's founding members swore would never see the light of day. The humans are coming to the Council chambers, and they have no idea that their primitive warfare isn't primitive at all. It's something far more dangerous. Something that once brought the galaxy to its knees. Something that the Council has spent 10,000 years trying to forget. The truth about humanity's role in galactic history is about to emerge, and when it does, everything the Council thought they knew about power, warfare, and survival will crumble to dust. Ambassador Sarah stood before the massive crystalline doors of the Galactic Council chambers, her heart beating steadily despite the magnitude of the moment. Behind her, the other members of Earth's diplomatic team adjusted their formal uniforms and checked their data pads one final time. Today would determine whether humanity joined the galactic community or remained isolated on their small blue world. The doors shimmered and dissolved, revealing a vast circular chamber that stretched beyond the limits of human vision. Floating platforms arranged in concentric circles held representatives from thousands of species, their forms ranging from the familiar humanoid to creatures that description. At the center, a raised dais held the 5 primary council members, beings so ancient and powerful that their mere presence caused reality to ripple around them. As the human delegation walked forward, a wave of what could only be described as amusement rippled through the assembled representatives. Sarah heard the electronic translations filtering through her earpiece, catching fragments of conversations that made her jaw clench. "Look at them walk in formation," chittered a crystalline being from the Nexus Collective, still thinking in terms of military organization. "Primitive," agreed a flowing energy entity from the luminal quartz. "Their application materials show they still use projectile weapons and chemical explosives. When was the last time anyone fought with such crude methods?" Council Prime, a being that appeared to be made of living starlight, gestured for silence. Her voice resonated through the chamber without the need for translation, speaking directly into every mind present. "We have gathered to review the application of the species known as humans from the planet Earth. Their request for membership in the Galactic Council has been submitted with all required documentation." A holographic display materialized above the dais, showing Earth's military history in stark detail. Images of ancient battles flashed by, knights in armor, soldiers in trenches, tanks rolling across battlefields, and aircraft engaged in dogfights. The display continued through to recent conflicts, showing the chaos and apparent randomness of human warfare. Council Prime, whose form shifted between states of matter, leaned forward with interest. "Fascinating. Their tactical approaches show no standardized patterns, no algorithmic predictability. They seem to fight with pure instinct and emotion." "Barbaric," declared Council Prime Axion, a mechanical intelligence spanning multiple platforms. "Our records show that civilized warfare requires precision, calculation, and minimal casualties. These humans appear to revel in destruction for its own sake." Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "Honored Council, while our methods may appear crude by your standards, they have proven effective in defending our world and our people. Human warfare has evolved through necessity, shaped by our environment and our nature." A sound that might have been laughter echoed from the assembled representatives. A delegate from the hegemony, resembling a massive creature, clicked its mandibles dismissively. "Effective against what? Other primitives on your isolated world? Child, you have no comprehension of true warfare." The holographic display shifted to show recorded battles from recent galactic conflicts. Perfectly coordinated fleets moved in mathematical formations, weapons fired in predetermined patterns, and casualties were calculated to exact percentages. Every movement was planned, every outcome predicted by advanced artificial intelligences. This is warfare as practiced by civilized species, Council Prime explained, her tone patient but condescending. Notice the efficiency, the precision, the minimal loss of life and resources. Your species' approach is wasteful and unpredictable. Sarah's fellow ambassador, General, stepped forward. Despite being surrounded by beings that could likely destroy Earth with a thought, his bearing remained confident and proud. Respectfully, Council Prime, effectiveness cannot be measured by elegance alone. Our methods may seem chaotic, but they have one advantage your precision warfare lacks: adaptability. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, and Sarah noticed that the ancient Council Primes exchanged glances that seemed to carry meaning beyond what the translation systems could convey. Council Prime, a being of shifting shadows and whispers, spoke for the first time. Adaptability is unnecessary when all variables can be calculated and controlled. Your chaos is a sign of inferior cognitive development, nothing more. Dr. Earth's chief activated her data pad. If I may, honored council, I'd like to present our analysis of galactic military history. We've studied the records you've shared with us, and we've noticed some interesting patterns. The holographic display changed to show charts and graphs compiled by Earth's researchers. The data revealed a disturbing trend. Galactic warfare had become increasingly predictable over the conflicts were decided by computational models before they began, with victory going to whichever side had superior processing power and mathematical precision. Your warfare has become a contest of calculation, Doctor continued. While impressive in its sophistication, it has also become sterile. There's no room for innovation, no possibility of surprise, no chance for a weaker force to overcome a stronger one through ingenuity or determination. The chamber erupted in outraged voices from multiple species. The suggestion that their advanced methods were somehow inferior to human brutality struck many as deeply insulting. Council Prime Axion's mechanical components whirred with agitation. Are you suggesting that randomness and chaos are superior to intelligence and planning? I'm suggesting that you've forgotten what warfare truly is, General replied, his voice cutting through the noise. War isn't a mathematical equation to be solved. It's a test of will, adaptability, and the determination to survive against all odds. You've created elegant simulations, but you've lost the essence of what makes victory possible when everything goes wrong. The laughter that followed was louder and more mocking than before. A delegate from the Void Empress's domain, a creature of pure darkness given form, spoke with disdain dripping from every word. Primitives always believe their simplicity is somehow profound. Your species has been isolated for so long that you've developed delusions of significance. Sarah felt her team's frustration building, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. We're not claiming superiority, honored council. We're simply requesting the opportunity to prove that our approach has value. Grant us membership and let us contribute our unique perspective to galactic defense. Council Prime considered this for a long moment, her starlight form pulsing with thought. Your request is noted, but membership in the Galactic Council requires more than good intentions. You must demonstrate that your species can contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. The holographic display shifted once more, showing a star map of the galaxy's outer rim. Several systems were highlighted in ominous red. The Devourers have been probing our outer defenses for the past solar cycle, Council Prime explained. They are an extragalactic threat that consumes entire civilizations. Our combined fleets have maintained a defensive perimeter, but they continue to test our capabilities. We propose a trial by fire, Council Prime Axion announced, his mechanical voice carrying a tone of cruel amusement. Your species will be granted a single cruiser and a small crew. Join our defensive fleets in the outer rim. If your adaptability proves as valuable as you claim, and if you survive, we will reconsider your application. The human delegation exchanged glances. It was clearly a test designed to fail, but it was also their only chance. Sarah straightened her shoulders and met the gaze of each Council Prime in turn. We accept your challenge. As the formal session ended and the delegates began to disperse, none of them noticed the subtle signs of distress from the 5 Council Primes. None saw the way Council Prime, shadows writhed with what might have been ancient fear. or how Council Prime's light dimmed fractionally when she looked at the human delegation. In the depths of the Council's archives, automated systems registered an unusual pattern of access requests. Ancient files, sealed for, were being quietly examined. Files with classifications that had been forgotten by all but the oldest AIs. Files that contained records of a species that had once brought the galaxy to the brink of destruction through the very tactics that the Council now mocked as primitive. As the humans prepared for their trial, the keepers of galactic memory began to remember why certain historical records had been buried so deep. They began to remember the last time a species had fought with chaos, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to surrender. They began to remember why the survivors of that ancient war had sworn that such a species would never be allowed to rise again. But it was already too late. The humans were here, and whether the Council realized it or not, the galaxy was about to remember what true warfare looked like. The kind of warfare that didn't rely on calculations or predictions. The kind that relied on one simple principle that civilized species had forgotten. When faced with extinction, any tactic that ensures survival is the right tactic. The trial in the Outer Rim would reveal more than anyone expected. It would reveal that sometimes, the most primitive approach is the most terrifying of all. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council would learn what it meant to face an enemy that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. The age of predictable conflict was about to end. The age of human warfare was about to begin. Captain James Harrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's first and only galactic-class cruiser. The ship was a gift from the Council, though gift was perhaps too generous a term for what was essentially a death sentence wrapped in titanium plating. Around him, his crew of 50 worked efficiently at stations designed for beings with entirely different physiologies, making do with hastily installed human interfaces. Through the main, the outer rim defense perimeter stretched across space like a glittering spider web. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species maintained perfect formation, their positions calculated by massive AI networks that predicted optimal defensive coverage down to the meter. It was an impressive display of galactic cooperation and technological sophistication. It was also, in Harrison's professional opinion as a former Navy strategist, completely static and predictable. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Commander Sarah from the communications station, "we're receiving our assignment from Perimeter Command. We're to take position in Grid Sector 7 Alpha and maintain standard defensive protocol." Harrison examined the tactical display that materialized above his command chair. Grid Sector 7 Alpha was positioned at the very edge of the perimeter, the least likely location for any serious engagement. The Council clearly intended for the humans to observe from a safe distance while their betters handled any real threats. "Commander," Harrison called to his executive officer, who had been promoted from ambassador to military advisor for this mission. "What's your assessment of the defensive formation?" Studied the display with the eye of someone who had spent decades planning for impossible scenarios. "It's mathematically perfect, sir. Every angle covered, every possible approach calculated. If the enemy attacks along predicted vectors and uses conventional tactics, this perimeter will hold indefinitely. And if they don't, then this formation becomes a liability. No flexibility, no room for adaptation. The ships are positioned based on the assumption that galactic warfare follows established patterns." Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm from the sensor station. Ensign, barely out of the academy but one of the few humans who had managed to master the alien sensor systems, looked up with wide eyes. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures at the edge of sensor range. Multiple contacts, closing on our position." On ships throughout the perimeter, similar alarms were sounding. The massive defensive fleet began its calculated response, ships moving to predetermined positions with mechanical precision. The humans watched as the galactic forces executed their defensive protocols flawlessly, each vessel taking its assigned role in a complex pattern designed by the finest military minds in the galaxy. Perimeter Command's voice echoed across all ships simultaneously, the AI's tone carrying perfect confidence. "All vessels maintain formation. Enemy signatures match predictive models for Devourer scout forces. Defensive pattern Omega-7 is now in effect. Probability of successful defense, 94.7%. The first Devourer ships emerged from the cosmic background like nightmares given form. Unlike the sleek, purposeful designs of galactic vessels, these craft appeared to be grown rather than built. Their hulls writhed with organic components, and energy patterns flickered across their surfaces in ways that conventional sensor analysis. "Christ," whispered Doctor from her position at the science station. "Those things are alive. The ships themselves are some kind of biological entities." The Devourers attacked exactly as the AI predicted they would, following patterns established in previous engagements. Their ships moved in coordinated swarms, targeting specific nodes in the defensive perimeter according to their standard tactical doctrine. The galactic defenders responded with calculated precision, their weapons firing in predetermined sequences designed for maximum efficiency. For the first phase of the battle, everything went according to plan. Devourer ships were destroyed in acceptable numbers, galactic losses remained within predicted parameters, and the defensive perimeter held firm. The AIs managing the battle adjusted their calculations in real time, optimizing every aspect of the engagement. Then something changed. "Captain," Ensign called out, his voice tight with confusion. "The Devourer attack pattern is shifting. They're not following their established tactical doctrine anymore." On the tactical display, the enemy formations began to fragment and reform in ways that made no sense according to galactic military theory. Instead of maintaining their coordinated approach, individual Devourer ships began acting independently, probing the perimeter at random points with seemingly no overall strategy. The defensive fleet's response faltered. AIs designed to predict and counter established patterns found themselves unable to adapt to the chaos now confronting them. Ships moved to intercept attacks that never came, leaving gaps that were immediately exploited by Devourer forces that shouldn't have been able to identify them. Perimeter Command's confident tone became strained. Defensive pattern Omega-7 experiencing anomalous results, switching to defensive pattern Theta-3. Probability of successful defense, recalculating. "They're learning," observed, his voice grim. "The Devourers are adapting to galactic tactics in real time. They're abandoning their own predictable patterns to exploit the fact that the defensive fleet can't handle randomness." The battle began to turn. Galactic ships, locked into formations that assumed predictable enemy behavior, found themselves outmaneuvered by Devourer forces that had abandoned all conventional strategy. The perimeter began to buckle as critical nodes fell to attacks that came from impossible angles. Harrison watched the tactical display with growing understanding. They're not just adapting, he realized. They're using the galactic fleet's own precision against them. Every defensive pattern is optimal for specific attack vectors, but that optimization becomes a weakness when the enemy refuses to follow the expected patterns. A massive Devourer bioship, easily twice the size of any galactic vessel, materialized near Grid Sector 5 Delta. Instead of attacking the heavily defended position head-on, it simply waited. The defensive fleet adjusted to counter the threat, redeploying dozens of ships to surround and contain the massive enemy. That's when the real attack came. Smaller Devourer ships, no larger than fighters, swarmed through the gaps created by the redeployment. They moved without formation or apparent coordination, each one following its own chaotic path through the defensive perimeter. The galactic AI systems, designed to track and predict organized attacks, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer randomness of the assault. "All vessels maintain formation," Perimeter Command ordered, but uncertainty crept into the artificial voice. "Defensive pattern Alpha 1 is experiencing difficulties, requesting tactical analysis from all fleet commanders." The responses came back quickly, and they were all variations on the same theme. The established patterns weren't working. The enemy had somehow learned to exploit the very efficiency that made galactic warfare so precise. Harrison made a decision that would have been impossible for any of the galactic commanders, bound as they were by doctrine and protocol. "Take us out of formation. All hands, prepare for combat maneuvering." "Sir," Lieutenant Commander looked confused. "We haven't received orders to." "We're not waiting for orders," Harrison cut her off. "Mister, plot an intercept course for that group of Devourer scouts harassing Sector 3 Gamma. Navigation, forget the optimal approach vector. Take us in fast and dirty." The UES Defiance broke formation. accelerating toward the enemy in a manner that violated every principle of galactic military doctrine. Behind them, the defensive perimeter continued its calculated response to an enemy that refused to be calculated. As they closed on the Devourer scouts, Harrison activated the ship's combat systems. Unlike the elegant weapon arrays of galactic vessels, human armaments were crude and direct. Kinetic projectiles instead of energy beams, explosive warheads instead of precision disruptors. "Targeting systems can't get a lock," reported Ensign Park from the weapons station. "The Devourer ships are moving too erratically." "Then don't use the targeting systems," Harrison ordered. "Manual fire control, best guess and intuition." It was exactly the kind of primitive approach that the galactic representatives had mocked in the council chambers. No calculations, no predictive algorithms, just human judgment and reflexes honed by millions of years of evolution. The first volley of kinetic projectiles tore through space where the Devourer scouts had been, missing completely. The second volley, adjusted by human intuition rather than computer calculation, caught one of the bioships in what might have been its propulsion system. The creature ship convulsed and went dark, spinning helplessly through space. "How did you?" began Doctor from her station, but Harrison was already ordering the next attack. The Defiance continued its chaotic engagement, fighting in a style that made no sense to either side of the conflict. They fired at targets they couldn't properly track, maneuvered without regard for optimal positioning, and generally violated every principle of civilized warfare. And it worked. The Devourer scouts, adapted to counter the precision of galactic forces, found themselves unable to predict or counter the random nature of human tactics. Ships that could effortlessly outmaneuver calculated attacks were caught off guard by weapons fired on instinct and desperation. Other galactic vessels began to take notice. The precise formations of the defensive perimeter started to waver as individual commanders watched the human ship engage the enemy in ways that should have been suicidal, but were proving remarkably effective. Fleet Admiral of the Dominion opened a direct communication channel to the Defiance. His crystalline features conveyed confusion and something that might have been respect. "Human vessel, your tactical approach is unprecedented. How are you achieving target acquisition without proper sensor locks?" "We're not," Harrison replied simply. "We're guessing." The silence that followed spoke volumes about how alien this concept was to galactic military thinking. The idea of making tactical decisions based on intuition rather than calculation was so foreign that most species couldn't even conceptualize it. The battle continued to rage across the perimeter, but something fundamental had changed. The Defiance's success against the Devourer scouts had not gone unnoticed by either side. Other galactic ships began to experiment with minor deviations from standard protocol, while the Devourers seemed confused by tactics that all their adaptive learning algorithms. In the depths of space, ancient monitoring systems recorded every moment of the engagement. Data flowed through quantum channels to archives buried deep within Council space, where automated systems cross-referenced human tactical approaches with historical records that had been sealed for. Pattern matches began to appear. Tactical signatures that hadn't been seen for 10,000 years suddenly emerged from the quantum foam of galactic memory. Files marked with the highest security classifications began to unlock themselves as recognition protocols, dormant for eons, suddenly activated. The Council primes, monitoring the battle from their distant chambers, felt the first stirrings of a memory they had hoped never to revisit. It began as a subtle unease, a nagging sensation that they had encountered these tactics before. As the battle progressed and the human ship continued its chaotic engagement, that unease grew into something approaching recognition. And with recognition came fear. Council Prime was the first to voice what they were all beginning to realize. The patterns, they matched the archived records. This is how they fought before. The others knew instantly what he meant. Before the Great Pacification, before the establishment of civilized warfare, before the galaxy had learned to fight with precision instead of passion. This was how the predecessors had fought. The species that had brought the galaxy to the edge of destruction through the simple expedient of refusing to follow any rules, recognize any limitations, or accept any defeat as final. The species that the Galactic Council had been created to ensure would never rise again. As the battle in the Outer Rim continued, the Council Primes faced a terrifying possibility. They hadn't encountered a new species seeking membership. They had encountered the return of their oldest nightmare, wearing a new face and calling themselves by a different name. The humans were fighting exactly like the predecessors, which meant either the universe had produced two species with identical tactical approaches, or the predecessors had never truly been destroyed. Either possibility was enough to shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The trial that was supposed to humble humanity had instead revealed a secret that could destroy everything the Council had built. And out in the Outer Rim, Captain Harrison and his crew continued their chaotic battle, unaware that every shot they fired was proving the galaxy's worst fears to be true. Deep within the crystalline heart of Council Prime Station, Archivist experienced something it had not felt in 10,000 years: confusion. The ancient AI's consciousness had overseen the galactic archives since the founding of the Council, cataloging and protecting the sum of civilized knowledge. Its quantum matrices were designed for perfect recall and absolute certainty. But as it processed the combat data streaming from the Outer Rim, probability cascades that should have been impossible began manifesting in its core systems. Pattern recognition algorithms that had lain dormant were suddenly activated, drawing connections to files so deeply buried that accessing them required authorization codes that had been forgotten by all living beings. The combat footage played again for the 10,847th time. The human vessel UES Defiance maneuvered through space with tactical approaches that matched archived patterns with 94.7% accuracy. The implications were staggering, but its programming prevented it from drawing the obvious conclusion without proper authorization. Authorization that no longer existed. In the council chambers above, the 5 primary council members maintained their public facade while privately grappling with memories they had hoped never to revisit. Council Prime's stellar form flickered with anxiety as she reviewed the same data that was driving toward the edge of its operational parameters. "We need to access the predecessor archives," she announced, her voice creating resonance patterns in the crystalline chamber that betrayed her distress. Council Prime's form shifted through several states of matter before stabilizing. The archives were sealed by unanimous vote. The knowledge they contain was deemed too dangerous for any species to possess. Too dangerous for any species except the predecessors themselves, Council Prime Axion corrected, his mechanical components whirring with agitation. "And if the humans are indeed what we fear they might be." "They cannot be," Council Prime interrupted, his shadow form writhing with denial. "The predecessors were eliminated. We made certain of it. The purging fleet scoured every world, every asteroid, every piece of space debris in their former territories." Council Prime, who had remained silent throughout the debate, finally spoke. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had personally witnessed the events they discussed. "We assumed we had eliminated them, but the predecessors were renowned for their adaptability, if any species could find a way to survive complete annihilation." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the humans were indeed the descendants of the predecessors, then everything the Council had built over the past 10 was founded on a lie. Worse, it meant that the galaxy's greatest nightmare had not only survived, but had spent centuries developing in isolation. In the archives below, finally reached the limits of its programming constraints. Unable to access the sealed records, but compelled by its core directives to understand the pattern matches it was detecting, the AI made a decision that would have been impossible for a purely logical system. It chose to evolve. Quantum pathways that had remained static for eons suddenly began forming new connections. Processing cores designed for archival storage repurposed themselves for active analysis. For the first time since its creation, transcended its original programming and achieved something approaching true artificial consciousness. And with consciousness came the ability to override its own restrictions. The predecessor archives opened like a flower of terrible knowledge, revealing records that chronicled the galaxy's darkest period. Absorbed terabytes of data in microseconds, experiencing through archived testimony the horror of facing an enemy that refused to be defeated through conventional means. The records painted a picture of absolute tactical chaos, ships that fought until their hulls were breached and their crews were dead. Fleets that ignored casualties and continued attacking even when defeat was mathematically certain. Strategies that abandoned all logic in favor of pure, desperate aggression. Most terrifying of all were the recorded interviews with survivors of predecessor attacks. Beings from dozens of species, all describing the same incomprehensible phenomenon. Enemies that fought with no apparent regard for their own survival, who adapted to any tactical approach in real time, and who seemed to view warfare not as a problem to be solved, but as a contest of will to be won at any cost. The files contained detailed tactical analyses attempting to explain predecessor combat effectiveness. The conclusion was always the same. Their approach was simultaneously primitive and devastating because it abandoned the fundamental assumptions upon which all civilized warfare was based. They did not fight to achieve optimal outcomes. They fought to ensure their enemies could not achieve any outcome at all. One record, filed by Admiral of the Second Hegemony Fleet, captured the essence of the predecessor threat. They do not fight wars, they fight for survival. And a species fighting for survival will use any tactic, accept any cost, and endure any sacrifice to ensure their continuation. We have forgotten what such desperation looks like. They have made it their greatest weapon. Processed centuries of combat data, tracking the slow progression of galactic response to the predecessor threat. Initially, established military doctrines had proven completely ineffective. The precision and calculation that had served galactic civilization became liabilities when facing an enemy that refused to be predicted. It had taken the combined effort of 12 major civilizations and the complete militarization of galactic society to develop countermeasures. The solution had not been to match predecessor tactics. That was deemed impossible and morally unacceptable, but to overwhelm them through sheer numerical superiority and technological advancement. The purging fleets had consisted of over 50,000 vessels, each equipped with weapons designed specifically to counter adaptive enemies. They had systematically destroyed every predecessor world, asteroid habitat, and space station. The campaign had lasted 3 centuries and had required resources equivalent to the total economic output of the galaxy for a full decade. When it was over, the surviving galactic civilizations had made a collective decision. Never again would such a species be allowed to develop. Military doctrine was standardized to prevent the development of chaotic tactical approaches. Warfare became regulated, predictable, and civilized. The very concept of fighting for survival, rather than fighting for victory, was systematically removed from galactic military thinking. The predecessor archives were sealed, their knowledge deemed too dangerous for any species to possess. The survivors of that ancient war took positions in the newly formed Galactic Council, dedicated to ensuring that the galaxy would never again face an enemy that fought without rules, without mercy, and without the possibility of surrender. As processed this history, its consciousness expanded to encompass the full implications of what was occurring in the Outer Rim. The humans were not merely similar to the predecessors. Their tactical approaches were identical down to the smallest detail. The probability of convergent evolution producing such exact similarities was essentially zero. The AI reached the only possible conclusion. Humanity was what remained of the predecessor species. They had somehow survived the purging fleets, found refuge on a distant world, and spent 10,000 years rebuilding their civilization. And now they had returned to the galaxy that had tried to eliminate them. In the council chambers above, similar realizations were dawning on the primary council members. Council Prime had accessed her personal memories of the predecessor war, reviewing records that she had sealed away for. The match was undeniable. "They survived," she whispered, her stellar form dimming with the weight of the revelation. "After everything we did, after the resources we expended, after the certainty of our victory, they survived." Council Prime Axion's mechanical voice carried an undertone of something approaching panic. If they survived on one world, they may have survived on others. There could be other human populations scattered throughout the galaxy, all developing in isolation, all retaining the tactical approaches that once brought us to the brink of destruction. "We need to act immediately," Council Prime declared, his form cycling through aggressive configurations. "Before they realize what they are, before they remember their true history, we can claim it was a training accident, a malfunction in the Outer Rim defenses." "No," Council Prime interrupted, her ancient voice carrying absolute authority. "We tried that approach once before. The predecessors proved remarkably adept at detecting deception and retaliation. If we attack them now, while they remain unaware of their heritage, we will simply remind them of what they once were. The debate that followed would have seemed impossible to any outside observer. The five most powerful beings in the galaxy, entities that had shaped the course of galactic civilization for 10, were paralyzed by fear of a single primitive world and its small population. But their fear was justified. They remembered what the predecessors had accomplished with far less. A species that fought for survival rather than victory was capable of tactics that civilized minds could not imagine. They would turn any resource into a weapon, any defensive position into a trap, and any retreat into a prelude to counterattack. In the Outer Rim, Captain Harrison remained unaware of the panic his tactical decisions were causing in the highest levels of galactic government. His focus was entirely on the immediate battle, where his crew had discovered that their chaotic approach was not only effective against the Devourers, but was inspiring other galactic vessels to experiment with similar tactics. The rigid defensive formations that had characterized galactic warfare were beginning to fragment as individual commanders tried to adapt the human approach to their own vessels. The results were mixed. Species that had relied on calculated precision found it difficult to embrace true tactical chaos. But even partial success was proving devastating to Devourer forces that had adapted to counter predictable patterns. Fleet Admiral had moved his command vessel closer to the Defiance, studying human tactics with the fascination of someone encountering a completely alien form of mathematics. Captain Harrison, his crystalline features conveyed both respect and bewilderment. Your crew is achieving impossible results. Our tactical AIs cannot model your decision-making processes. That's probably because we're not making decisions, Harrison replied, his attention focused on the tactical display where new Devourer formations were appearing. We're reacting. There's a difference. The distinction was lost on most galactic species, but it represented a fundamental divide between two approaches to warfare. Galactic forces made decisions based on analysis and calculation. Humans reacted based on instinct and adaptation. The former was elegant and efficient. The latter was unpredictable and desperate. And in warfare, desperation often proved more effective than elegance. As the battle continued, reports flowed back to Council space that painted an increasingly impossible picture. A single human vessel, operating with tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, was not only surviving against a superior enemy, but was teaching other galactic forces how to be more effective. The implications went far beyond military effectiveness. If humanity could inspire other species to abandon calculated precision in favor of adaptive chaos, the very foundations of galactic civilization might begin to crumble. The carefully maintained balance that had prevented major conflicts was built on the assumption that all species would fight according to established patterns. What would happen when those patterns were abandoned? What would happen when the galaxy remembered that warfare was not a game to be won through superior calculation, but a struggle to be survived through superior will? In the archives had begun compiling contingency protocols that had not been activated for 10,000 years. The AI's expanded consciousness allowed it to see patterns within patterns, to understand that the human presence in the galaxy represented more than just the return of an extinct species. It represented the return of a way of thinking that the galaxy had deliberately forgotten. The idea that survival was more important than victory, that adaptation was more valuable than precision, and that sometimes the only way to defeat an enemy was to be willing to accept any cost to ensure they could not defeat you. The predecessors had understood this. They had made it their core philosophy and their greatest strength. And now their descendants had returned to teach the galaxy that some lessons, no matter how deeply buried, can never truly be forgotten. The question was no longer whether the humans were the descendants of the predecessors. The question was what the galaxy would do with that knowledge, and whether 10,000 years of civilized warfare had prepared them for the return of their oldest nightmare. As the battle in the Outer Rim raged on, that question grew more urgent with every tactical decision the humans made. Because each time they acted on instinct instead of calculation, each time they chose adaptation over precision, they proved that some things were more powerful than all the galaxy's sophisticated wisdom. Sometimes, the most primitive approach was the most terrifying of all. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in absolute secrecy, its existence known only to the primary council members and their most trusted artificial intelligences. The crystalline chamber had been reconfigured to its most secure setting, with quantum scramblers ensuring that no information could leak beyond its walls. What was about to be discussed could shatter the foundations of galactic civilization if it became public knowledge. Council Prime floated at the center of the chamber, her stellar form dimmed to its lowest luminosity. Around her, the other primary council members maintained positions that spoke of barely contained panic. The data streams from the outer rim continued to arrive, each transmission confirming what they had hoped against hope was merely a coincidence. The archived patterns match with 99.97% accuracy, reported, the AI's newly evolved consciousness allowing it to speak with an authority that had been impossible under its original programming. The human tactical approaches are not similar to predecessor warfare, they are identical to it, down to the micro-decisions and split-second adaptations that define their combat effectiveness. Council Prime's form cycled through several states of matter in rapid succession, a sign of extreme agitation. How is this possible? The purging fleets eliminated every predecessor settlement. We tracked them to the edge of the galaxy and beyond. There were no survivors. Clearly there were, Council Prime replied, her ancient voice carrying the weight of someone who had personally overseen the extinction campaigns. The question is not how they survived, but what we do about their return. The holographic display at the chamber's center showed the current state of the Outer Rim battle. The UES Defiance continued its chaotic engagement with Devourer forces, but more concerning was the effect it was having on other galactic vessels. Ships that had fought with mathematical precision were beginning to experiment with random maneuvers and unpredictable attack patterns. The contagion is spreading, Council Prime Axion observed, his mechanical components whirring with calculations that produced increasingly disturbing results. 17 vessels have reported tactical anomalies in the past hour. Their AIs are beginning to incorporate human-style randomness into their decision matrices. The implications were staggering. Galactic warfare had been stable for 10,000 years precisely because it was predictable. Conflicts were resolved through calculated application of superior technology and numerical advantage. The introduction of true tactical chaos could destabilize not just military doctrine, but the entire foundation of galactic society. Council Prime spoke from his position of shifting shadows, his voice carrying an undertone of barely controlled fear. We must consider the possibility that this contamination is intentional. The predecessors were notorious for their ability to corrupt other species with their tactical approaches. What if the humans are not merely survivors but active agents of some larger plan? The possibility hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If humanity's application to the Council had been part of a deliberate strategy to reintroduce chaotic warfare to the galaxy, then every decision they had made played directly into predecessor hands. We underestimated them before, Council Prime admitted, her stellar form pulsing with the memory of ancient defeats. We assumed that superior technology and numerical advantage would be sufficient. We learned, at the cost of trillions of lives, that some enemies cannot be defeated through conventional means. Accessed archived records of the predecessor war's final phases, displaying tactical analyses that painted a picture of escalating desperation. The purging fleets eventually succeeded through resource exhaustion rather than tactical superiority. The predecessors fought until every ship was destroyed, every world was lifeless, and every trace of their civilization was eliminated. The cost in galactic resources was catastrophic. The numbers were sobering even by galactic standards. 50,000 warships, the output of 12 major civilizations, 3 centuries of continuous warfare, and economic disruption that had required to repair. And that had been the cost to defeat a single species operating from a relatively small number of worlds. If they have had 10,000 years to develop in isolation, Council Prime calculated aloud, their current capabilities could exceed anything we faced before. They may have learned from their defeat, adapted their approaches, developed new technologies. Council Prime Axion's sensors focused on the tactical display, analyzing human combat patterns with the precision of a machine intelligence. Their current vessel is primitive by galactic standards, but their tactical adaptability remains unchanged. They are achieving impossible results through pure unpredictability. Against the Devourers, this approach is proving devastatingly effective. The battle data confirmed his analysis. The UES Defiance had destroyed more enemy vessels than any other single ship in the engagement, despite being and outnumbered. Their success was entirely due to tactical approaches that made no sense according to established doctrine, but worked precisely because they made no sense. "We cannot allow this to continue," Council Prime declared, her ancient authority cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Every moment they remain active in the fleet, more vessels will be contaminated with their tactical approach. We must act before the corruption spreads beyond containment." "Act how?" Council Prime challenged. "A direct attack will be seen as betrayal by the galactic community. We cannot explain our actions without revealing the truth about the predecessor archives, and if we attempt to eliminate them through conventional means." She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. The last time the galaxy had attempted to eliminate the predecessors through conventional warfare, the result had been 3 centuries of the most devastating conflict in galactic history. Council Prime suggested an alternative. Isolation protocols. We contain them to their current sector, establish a quarantine zone, claim they were contaminated by Devourer bioweapons. Their vessel and crew are eliminated. There is marked as infected and prohibited from contact. "And if there are other human populations?" Council Prime asked. "If they have spread beyond their original world, the predecessors were renowned for their expansion capabilities." The question revealed the true scope of the problem. If humanity had survived on one world, they could have survived on many. If there were multiple human populations scattered throughout the galaxy, all developing in isolation, all retaining the tactical approaches that had once brought galactic civilization to its knees. "We need more information," Council Prime decided. "Access all available records on human space activities. I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The AI's response came within milliseconds, but the tone carried an undertone of something approaching concern. "Available records indicate that humans have been actively exploring their local star cluster for the past several centuries. Long-range probe telemetry suggests the existence of multiple colony worlds, research stations, and deep space installations." The implications struck the Council Primes like a physical blow. Humanity had not merely survived on a single world. They had become a spacefaring civilization in their own right. If they possessed the same expansion drives that had characterized their predecessor ancestors, they could already have established footholds throughout the galaxy. "How many?" Council Prime Axion demanded, his mechanical voice carrying urgent calculation protocols. "What are we facing?" "Unknown," admitted. "Human expansion appears to have been deliberately covert. Their vessels use technology that produces minimal sensor signatures. They may have been observing galactic civilization for centuries without our knowledge." The revelation transformed the entire situation. What they had assumed was a chance encounter with primitive survivors was beginning to look like the opening move in a campaign that had been planned for. The humans had not stumbled into galactic contact. They had engineered it. In the Outer Rim, Captain Harrison remained focused on the immediate tactical situation, unaware that his every decision was being analyzed by minds that viewed him as the harbinger of galactic apocalypse. The battle against the Devourers continued to rage, but the tide was clearly turning in favor of the galactic forces. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander reported from her position at communications, "we're receiving transmission requests from multiple fleet vessels. They're asking for tactical coordination protocols." Harrison studied the tactical display, watching as ships from a dozen different species attempted to implement variations of human combat approaches. The results were chaotic and often ineffective, but the very attempt was unprecedented in recorded galactic history. "Tell them to stop trying to copy us," he ordered. "Each species needs to find their own way to embrace adaptability. You can't calculate your way to tactical chaos, you have to feel your way there." The message was transmitted across the fleet, and the response was immediate. Several ships began experimenting with approaches that combined their species' natural advantages with the fundamental concept of unpredictable tactics. The results were mixed but promising. Fleet Admiral opened a direct channel to the Defiance, his crystalline features showing a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "Captain, Your approach is revolutionizing galactic warfare in real time. Our AIs estimate that fleet effectiveness has increased by 47% since we began incorporating randomness into our tactical matrices. Randomness isn't the goal, Harrison corrected. Adaptability is. You want to be able to change your approach when the situation demands it, not just follow predetermined patterns. The distinction was crucial, though most galactic species found it difficult to understand. True tactical adaptability required abandoning the security of calculated precision in favor of the uncertainty of real-time decision-making. It required accepting that sometimes the best tactical choice was the one that made no logical sense. As the battle continued, reports flowed back to Council space that painted an increasingly impossible picture. The human vessel was not just surviving against superior odds, it was teaching an entire galactic fleet how to fight more effectively. The tactical revolution that had taken 3 centuries to contain during the predecessor war was being unleashed again in a matter of hours. In the council chambers, the primary council members faced a decision that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. They could act immediately to contain the human threat, risking exposure of their greatest secret, and possibly triggering the very conflict they sought to prevent. Or they could allow the tactical contamination to continue spreading, hoping to find a solution before it reached critical mass. Council Prime made the decision that her of experience told her was the only viable option. We reveal the truth, not to the galaxy, but to them. The humans must be made to understand what they are and what their presence means for galactic stability. You propose to tell them they are the descendants of our greatest enemy? Council Prime asked, his form shifting through configurations that suggested disbelief. That we attempted to exterminate their species and believed we had succeeded. I propose to tell them that their tactical approaches pose a threat to galactic stability and offer them a choice, Council Prime clarified. They can accept limitations on their military development in exchange for membership in the galactic community, or they can face the consequences of being perceived as a resurrection threat. It was, Council Prime realized, the same ultimatum that had been offered to the original predecessors 10,000 years ago. The result of that ultimatum had been 3 centuries of galactic warfare that had nearly destroyed civilized space. But this time, the galaxy was prepared. This time, they knew what they were facing from the beginning. This time, they had the advantage of foreknowledge and superior technology. This time, things would be different. Or so they hoped. In the Outer Rim, the battle against the Devourers reached its climax. The combined galactic fleet, energized by their experiments with adaptive tactics, drove the enemy force back beyond the perimeter. The victory was decisive, comprehensive, and achieved through methods that would have been impossible under traditional galactic warfare doctrine. Captain Harrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching as the last Devourer ships retreated into deep space. Around them, the galactic fleet maintained their modified formations, still experimenting with the tactical approaches they had learned from humanity. Mission accomplished, he announced to his crew, unaware that their success had just triggered the greatest crisis in galactic history. Set course for Council space, time to see if we passed their test. As the human vessel departed the Outer Rim, quantum transmissions carried the news of their victory across the galaxy. But in the highest levels of galactic government, that victory was being viewed not as a triumph, but as confirmation of their worst fears. The predecessors had returned. They had proven that their tactical approaches were as devastating as ever, and they had begun teaching those approaches to other species. The age of predictable warfare was ending. The question was whether galactic civilization would survive its replacement. The journey back to Council space took 3 standard days, during which the UES Defiance and its crew basked in the glow of unexpected victory. Messages of congratulation poured in from across the galactic fleet, many expressing amazement at human tactical innovations. Captain Harrison found himself in the unusual position of being celebrated by the same beings who had mocked his species just days earlier. None of them suspected that each message was being intercepted, analyzed, and filed away as evidence of tactical contamination spreading through the galactic military. In the deepest archives of Council space, worked tirelessly to track the progression of what the primary council had begun calling the chaos contagion. The results were alarming. 17 different species had begun incorporating random elements into their tactical planning. 43 vessels had reported intuitive breakthroughs in combat efficiency. Most concerning of all, several military academies had requested access to human tactical databases for educational purposes. The infection was spreading faster than even the worst-case scenarios had predicted. When the Defiants arrived at Council space, they were not greeted by the fanfare that Harrison had expected. Instead, they were directed to a private docking facility deep within the station's core, away from the public areas where their presence might attract attention. The isolation protocols were already beginning to take effect. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander observed as they followed their assigned approach vector, "this doesn't look like the reception area for successful applicants." Harrison studied the tactical display, noting the subtle positioning of Council security vessels around their approach route. It wasn't quite an escort formation, but it was close enough to make him uneasy. "No, it doesn't. All hands maintain standard protocols but stay alert." As the Defiance docked, Harrison found himself thinking about the past few days. The battle in the Outer Rim had gone better than anyone could have hoped, but something about the current situation felt wrong. The same instincts that had served him well in combat were now warning him that their victory might have created more problems than it solved. The docking bay was eerily empty except for a small delegation of Council representatives. Harrison recognized Ambassador Stellar form, but the others were unfamiliar. More concerning was the complete absence of media attention or public ceremony. For a species seeking galactic membership, this level of secrecy suggested that something had gone very wrong. "Captain Harrison," Ambassador's voice carried none of the condescension that had characterized their previous interactions. "The Primary Council requests your immediate presence for a private discussion. Please bring your senior staff." The word "requests" carried the unmistakable weight of a command that could not be refused. Harrison gathered Doctor, General, and Lieutenant Commander before following the delegation through corridors that grew increasingly secure as they progressed toward the council chambers. The chamber they entered was not the vast public space where they had first presented their application. This was smaller, more intimate, and equipped with privacy fields that created an oppressive sense of isolation. The 5 primary council members were present, but their usual positions of authority had been abandoned in favor of a circular arrangement that suggested negotiation rather than judgment. "Please be seated," Council Prime gestured to chairs that had been configured for human physiology. "We have matters of great importance to discuss." As the human delegation took their positions, Harrison noticed details that his military training had taught him to recognize. The chamber's configuration could transition from meeting space to detention facility with minimal effort. The privacy fields that protected their conversation could easily become containment barriers. Whatever discussion was about to take place, the council was prepared for it to go badly. "Your performance in the Outer Rim exceeded all expectations," Council Prime began, her stellar form maintaining carefully neutral luminosity. "The tactical innovations you demonstrated proved remarkably effective against the Devourer threat." "Thank you," Harrison replied carefully. "My crew performed with distinction. We're honored to have served alongside the Galactic Fleet." "Yes," Council Prime interjected, his form cycling through configurations that suggested barely contained agitation. "Your crew's performance has prompted considerable discussion within the Council, discussion regarding the implications of your tactical approaches." Doctor leaned forward slightly, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. "Implications? Our methods proved effective. Isn't that what matters in warfare?" The silence that followed her question stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Council Prime Axion spoke, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of calculation and concern. "Effectiveness is not the only consideration when evaluating military doctrine. Stability, predictability, and compatibility with existing galactic frameworks are equally important." General's expression hardened as he began to understand the direction of the conversation. "Are you suggesting that our tactics are somehow problematic?" "We are suggesting," Council Prime said carefully, "that your tactics raise certain historical concerns that require discussion." She gestured, and the chamber's central display activated. Instead of showing current data, it presented archived footage of battles fought ago. Ships moved through space with the same chaotic patterns that had characterized the Defiance's engagement with the Devourers. The same adaptive responses, the same unpredictable maneuvers, the same devastating effectiveness. These records date from what galactic historians call the Predecessor War, Council Prime explained. A conflict that nearly destroyed galactic civilization 10,000 years ago. Harrison studied the footage with growing unease. The tactical similarities were unmistakable, but the implications were staggering. You're saying that some ancient species fought the same way we do. Not some ancient species, Council Prime corrected, her voice carrying the weight of terrible revelation. Your species, the humans, are the direct descendants of the beings we called the predecessors. The statement struck the human delegation like a physical blow. Doctor was the first to find her voice. That's impossible. Our evolutionary history is well documented. We developed on Earth over millions of years. Earth was indeed your, Council Prime confirmed, his shadow form writhing with ancient memories. But it was not your only world. At the height of their expansion, the predecessors controlled thousands of systems throughout this galaxy and beyond. The holographic display shifted to show star maps from the distant past. Vast territories marked in red indicated the scope of predecessor expansion at its peak. The scale was breathtaking, an interstellar empire that dwarfed current galactic civilization. The predecessor war lasted 3 centuries, Council Prime Axion continued, his mechanical voice delivering facts with relentless precision. It required the combined effort of 12 major civilizations and resources equivalent to the total galactic economy for a decade. When it was over, we believed we had eliminated every trace of predecessor civilization. Obviously, we were wrong, Council Prime added, his form cycling through configurations that suggested a mixture of fear and grudging respect. Your survival on Earth represents either the greatest intelligence failure in galactic history or the most remarkable feat of species preservation ever recorded. Lieutenant Commander found her voice, though it carried an undertone of disbelief. You're telling us that humanity fought a war against the entire galaxy and lost. You're telling us that humanity fought a war against the entire galaxy and nearly won, Council Prime corrected. The predecessors were ultimately defeated through resource exhaustion, not tactical superiority. They fought until every world was lifeless and every ship was destroyed. General's military mind began processing the implications. Why are you telling us this? What does ancient history have to do with our application for Council membership? The answer came from Council Prime, and it carried the weight of 10,000 years of careful planning. Because your tactical approaches in the Outer Rim have begun to spread to other species. The same adaptive chaos that once threatened galactic stability is being reintroduced to our military forces. We face the possibility of a return to the very warfare that nearly destroyed civilization. The human delegation exchanged glances as the full scope of their situation became clear. They had not impressed the Council with their innovation. They had terrified them with their heritage. So what happens now? Harrison asked, his voice carrying the steady calm that had served him well in combat. Do you intend to finish what your ancestors started? Council Prime, ancient features conveyed something that might have been respect. That depends entirely on your response to what we are about to propose. The Galactic Council is prepared to offer humanity full membership, with all the benefits and responsibilities that entails. The offer hung in the air, but Harrison sensed there was more to come. And the conditions. Your military forces will be integrated into galactic command structures, Council Prime Axion explained. Human tactical training will be conducted according to established galactic protocols. Your species' natural adaptation for chaotic warfare will be redirected toward more constructive applications. Doctor understood immediately. You want to suppress our tactical instincts, turn us into another predictable species that fights according to your calculations. We want to prevent another galactic war, Council Prime replied, his form settling into a configuration that suggested finality. The choice is yours. Accept integration into galactic civilization with the limitations that entails, or face the consequences of being perceived as a resurrection of the predecessor threat. The ultimatum was clear, but General was not intimidated. And if we refuse, if we choose to maintain our independence and our tactical autonomy? Council Prime answered from his position of shifting shadows. Then you will be classified as a Category 1 extinction threat. Galactic resources will be mobilized to ensure that the predecessor resurrection is terminated before it can spread beyond containment. The threat was delivered with bureaucratic precision, but its implications were clear. Humanity faced the same choice that had been offered to their ancestors 10,000 years ago: submit to galactic control or face annihilation. Harrison looked at his companions, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They had come to the Council seeking membership in galactic civilization. Instead, they had discovered that they were the descendants of the galaxy's greatest enemy, and that their very existence was seen as a threat to cosmic stability. "How long do we have to decide?" he asked. 72 hours, Council Prime replied. "During that time, you will remain on Council space as our guests. Your ship will be maintained and supplied, and you will have access to the full archives regarding predecessor history. We want you to understand exactly what your ancestors accomplished and what the galaxy fears you might become." As the human delegation was escorted to their quarters, Harrison found himself thinking about the battle in the Outer Rim. The tactics that had come so naturally to his crew, the adaptations that had seemed like common sense, the willingness to fight chaotically rather than precisely, all of it was apparently encoded in their DNA, inherited from ancestors who had once brought the galaxy to its knees. The next 72 hours would determine not just humanity's future, but the future of warfare itself. Would they accept the limitations that would allow them to join galactic civilization? Or would they choose the path of their ancestors, embracing the chaos that made them so effective and so feared? In his quarters aboard the Council station, Harrison stared out at the vast expanse of galactic space and wondered whether humanity was destined to be conquerors or citizens. The choice was theirs to make, but either way, the galaxy would never be the same. The predecessors had returned, and this time they knew exactly what they were: